At 7 minutes past 8, on a freezing October morning, my daughter-in-law kicked off her mud-caked heels in the kitchen and shoved them across the floor toward my feet. "Clean them before we leave," she said, without once looking at my face. I stood there in silence until my son walked in. He glanced at the shoes. He glanced at me. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad, you're going to apologize to my wife right now, or you're going to pack your suitcase and get out of my house." I smiled. I walked down the hall, lifted the suitcase I had packed 5 days earlier, and left through the front door without a word. 1 week later, my phone showed 30 missed calls. Before we go any further, I want to say how grateful I am that you're here with me today. Tell me in the comments what country or what city you're watching from. I would love to know where this story finds you. And if stories about dignity, family, and the long road back to the truth are the kind of thing you came here for, consider subscribing to my channel, because this one is going to take us somewhere neither of us expects. The morning I left, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and old resentment. I had been standing at the counter since 6, the way I always did, cracking 2 eggs into the cast-iron pan my late wife Eleanor had carried home from a yard sale in 1987 for $1.50. The grease popped and hissed. Sunlight came through the bay window in long gold stripes across the hardwood, the same hardwood I had refinished with my own hands, on my own knees, in a summer when this house still felt like a home, and not like a hotel where I had been assigned the smallest room. Then Vanessa came in. She wore a silk robe the color of champagne, her hair pinned up, her phone already in her hand. She did not say good morning. She never said good morning. She moved through the kitchen the way a person moves through a room full of furniture, something to step around, not something to acknowledge. She poured herself a glass from the pitcher of juice I had squeezed by hand 40 minutes earlier, took 1 sip, wrinkled her nose, and set it down unfinished. I kept my eyes on the eggs. Then came the sharp clack of heels on tile. Her going-out shoes, the tall black ones she wore to the lunches she posted about. She stopped directly behind me. I heard a soft double thud. I turned around. She had dropped both shoes on the floor between us, soles turned up, caked with dried mud from wherever she had been the night before. She looked at me the way a hotel guest looks at a bellhop who is taking too long with the bags. "The soles are filthy," she said. "Get to it. I'm leaving at 10. My hand tightened around the spatula. Something moved through my chest then. Not anger exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been accumulating in that kitchen for 2 years and 11 months, thickening quietly, the way sediment settles in still water, until one day the water is no longer water at all. I set the spatula down. I turned to face her fully, and I said nothing. Vanessa raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Did you not hear me?" "I heard you," I said. "I heard every word." She tilted her head, the phone still glowing in her palm, her expression suspended somewhere between amusement and irritation, the look of someone who has never in her life had to consider the possibility of no. "Then what exactly are you waiting for?" Before I could answer, Bradley came down the stairs. My son, 42 years old, wearing a pressed linen shirt at 8 in the morning, as though he had somewhere important to be, which he did not. His agency work had thinned to nothing over the previous 3 months, but he still carried himself like a man standing at the summit of something, that borrowed posture, that inherited confidence. And of all the things that had broken my heart in 3 years, that posture had broken it most. He looked at the shoes on the floor. He looked at me, and something moved behind his eyes, something calculating. Something I recognized instantly as the version of my son I had spent his entire childhood praying he would never become. "Dad," he said. His voice was careful, pleasant. Pleasant the way a razor is pleasant in the half-second, before you understand that it is already cutting. "Vanessa asked you something." "I know what she asked." "Then why are you making this difficult?" He crossed his arms. "It's just shoes. You're home all day. We go out, we work. The least you can do is help around the house." "Help around the house." I turned the words over slowly, tasting each one. "Is that what this is?" Bradley's jaw tightened. He came closer, stopping 2 feet from me. And up close I could see everything. The tension in his neck, the shoulders drawn up toward his ears, the particular rigidity of a man who is not angry so much as embarrassed. Not by his wife's demand, by my refusal. My refusal had made him small in front of her, and Bradley could not tolerate feeling small. "I'm going to say this once," he said, and his voice dropped into something low and deliberate. Either you get on your knees right now and apologize to my wife for disrespecting her, or you get out of my house." The kitchen went very quiet. My heart did not pound, my hands did not shake. I had lived 72 years on this earth. I had buried a wife. I had built a company from a single mechanic's bay into a property trust worth more than my son could count on all his fingers twice over. I had carried things that would have flattened men half my age and walked out the other side still upright. And now my son, my blood, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in the alley behind our first apartment, was standing in my kitchen asking me to kneel. "Your house," I said. "That's right." I looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred, with something closer to grief, the kind that doesn't burn, that simply settles heavy in the bones and stays there. "All right, Bradley," I said. "All right." I walked past him. I walked past Vanessa, who was already lifting her phone to tap something into it, her face composing itself into an expression of wounded patience for an audience that was not in the room. I walked down the hall to the bedroom at the end of the corridor, the smallest room in the house, the one I had been given when I moved in, the one with the window facing the alley instead of the garden Eleanor had planted. I opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind a folded spare blanket, sat a dark leather suitcase. I had packed it 5 days earlier. Not impulsively, methodically. 3 suits, 2 pairs of shoes, Eleanor's photograph in its velvet frame, the small Bible she had given me on our wedding day, its spine cracked from 41 years of use, and 1 folder of documents I would need. I had known this morning was coming. I had simply been waiting to see what shape it would take when it arrived. I lifted the suitcase down, set it on the bed, checked the zipper one final time, and picked it up. Walking back down the hallway, I passed the wall of family photographs. Bradley at his college graduation. Bradley and Vanessa on their wedding day. Bradley laughing at some Christmas I could no longer place in time. My face appeared in almost none of them. I had always been the one behind the camera. That is its own kind of confession, if you know how to read it. I stepped into the foyer. Vanessa was in the living room now, phone raised, filming. Bradley stood at the bottom of the stairs with his arms crossed, watching me the way a man watches someone he fully expects to back down at the last possible second. I did not back down. I took my coat from the hook by the door. I put it on slowly. I smoothed the lapels flat with both hands, the way Eleanor used to do for me before every meeting that mattered. Then I turned to face my son one last time. "You asked me to leave," I said. "I'm leaving." Bradley stared at me, and for a fraction of a second, barely long enough to name, something flickered behind his eyes. Not regret, not yet, but the ghost of something. The first hairline crack in a wall he did not yet know was load-bearing. I opened the front door. The October air met my face, cool and clean, carrying the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke and the beginning of a season that strips things down to what they actually are. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me, and I did not look back. The car was already waiting at the bottom of the front steps. I had not called ahead. I had not needed to. Marcus Reyes had been my driver for 11 years, long enough to understand that when the leather suitcase came out of the closet, something was ending. He stood beside the car with the rear door already open, his gray cap pulled low against the wind. He looked at me. He looked at the suitcase in my hand, and he gave a single nod, the kind of nod that carries an entire conversation without spending a syllable on it. "Morning, Mr. Hensley," he said, taking the bag from my hand. "Morning, Marcus." He stowed it in the trunk with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this before. Not the leaving, the precision, the readiness, the shared understanding, built over 11 years, that when I moved with intention. I settled into the back seat. The leather was warm. He had run the heat for 20 minutes, the way he always did when the temperature dropped below 50. He closed my door softly and came around to the driver's side. "The Ashford?" he asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "The Ashford." The Ashford House was a converted 19th-century jailhouse on the north end of the city. Iron railings, arched stone ceilings, walls that had once held men who had lost everything they had. I had always found a quiet irony in staying there. That morning, the irony had teeth. Marcus pulled away from the curb, and I watched the house shrink in the side mirror. The limestone facade, the black iron fence, the hydrangeas Eleanor had planted along the front walk in 1999, now past their season, dry and skeletal in the flat morning light. The house grew smaller. Then it turned a corner and was gone. I reached into my coat and took out my phone. One name, I pressed it. It rang twice. Walter. Arthur Kellerman's voice was steady and fully awake. He had been expecting this call for 6 days, ever since I had walked into his office and told him to have everything ready and to wait. "Arthur," I said, "is it time?" I looked out the window at the ordinary world sliding past. Joggers, a woman pushing a stroller, a man arguing with a parking meter. The whole indifferent machinery of a Tuesday morning, entirely unaware that somewhere behind me, two people were about to discover that the floor they had been standing on for 5 years had never once belonged to them. "Start," I said, a beat of quiet on the other end. Then, phase 1 begins this morning. I ended the call and returned the phone to my pocket. Marcus glanced at me in the mirror. He did not ask. He never asked. But his eyes softened for a moment, the look of a man who understands what it costs another man to make a phone call like that. "You all right, Mr. Hensley?" I considered the question honestly, which is the only way that question deserves to be answered. My chest felt like the morning after a long rain. Not empty, cleared, scoured out by something that had needed to happen for a very long time. "I'm all right, Marcus," I said. "I'm better than I've been in 3 years." He nodded and turned his eyes back to the road. What Marcus did not know, what almost nobody knew, was that the single word, start, had just set 12 separate legal and financial instructions in motion. Arthur Kellerman was not merely my lawyer. He was the architect of a structure I had spent 30 years building quietly, in rooms nobody knew existed, for one purpose: to make certain that what I had built with my hands could never be taken, wasted, or stolen. Not by strangers, not by markets, and not by the people who happened to share my name. Phase 1 was simple. By close of business that day, every account Bradley and Vanessa accessed through the Hensley Family Trust would be reviewed, flagged, and placed under my sole authority. Every credit card tied to a trust account would be suspended. The car Bradley drove, leased under a Hensley holding company, would be flagged for recovery. And the 6 utility accounts serving the house on Chestnut Street would be transferred to an account requiring my personal authorization for every payment. I did none of it out of anger. I did it the way a surgeon does what must be done. Precisely, without cruelty, and without hesitation. Back in the house I could picture it exactly. Vanessa would still be arranging herself in the good light of the living room, composing a caption, assembling a small daily proof of domestic serenity for 200,000 people who believed she lived a charmed and gracious life. She would post something soft, a cup of tea, morning light on a throw pillow, her voice warm, her eyes bright. She had no idea what her audience was about to be shown instead. And Bradley was probably standing in the foyer, looking at the closed door, telling himself he had won something. That feeling would last until dinner. The Ashford's doorman stepped forward as we pulled up, but Marcus came around and opened my door before the man could reach it. A small gesture. It had always meant something to me. Loyalty rarely announces itself. It expresses itself in the size of things nobody is required to do. "Eleanor taught me to notice that. I'll call when I need you," I told him. "I'll be ready," he said. I walked in through the heavy iron doors, past the stone archways the architects had kept from the building's prison years. My room had been reserved for 3 weeks, because that was how long I estimated the first phase would need to finish its work. At the desk a young man smiled at me warmly. "Mr. Hensley, welcome back. Your room is ready." "Thank you, son." I took the key and walked to the elevator. And when the doors closed and I was finally alone, I let out one slow breath, the first genuinely free breath I had taken in nearly 3 years. My eyes were dry, but somewhere behind my sternum, something ached with the particular pain of a man who has done the right thing and still grieves that it was necessary at all. I pressed the button for the 4th floor, the machinery hummed, and somewhere across the city, Phase 1 had already begun its quiet work. 2 nights later, Kellerman called me at 9 in the evening. I was in the armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile, going cold on the side table, the city spread out below me like something slowly breathing. I had spent the day reading. I had walked along the river. I had eaten a bowl of chowder at a counter diner, where nobody knew my name and nobody needed to. It had been, in its strange way, one of the most peaceful days I had experienced in 3 years. "Walter," he said, and I could hear the particular tone he used when the news was professionally satisfying. "Phase 1 just had its first public moment. I set the tea down, tell me. Bradley took Vanessa to Harrow and Vine tonight. The place downtown where the entrees cost $40 and arrive looking like modern art. He paused the way he always did for effect. He tried to pay the check. First card declined, second card declined, third card declined. How much was the check? $312. He ended up calling the restaurant from his personal phone and reading out a debit card number. That one went through his own account, not a trust account. But the waiter had come back to the table 3 times by then. By the third visit, the table beside them had gone completely silent. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not with satisfaction, with something more complicated than that. Something that tasted like vinegar and honey at the same time. Did Vanessa say anything? Kellerman made a sound that was almost a laugh. According to my source at the restaurant, yes. When he came back from the call, she leaned across the table and said, quote, "What is happening with our accounts, Bradley? Because this is humiliating." My chest tightened, not with pleasure at their embarrassment, with the specific grief of a father who recognizes his son's humiliation and knows precisely who authored it. I had not done this to wound Bradley's pride. I had done it because Bradley needed to feel, for the first time in 20 years, the weight of a world that did not soften itself around him on my account. There is a thing that happens to a man who has never once been told no. The word stops existing for him. And when it finally arrives, it does not arrive as a word at all. It arrives as an earthquake. By the second week of October, Bradley had hired someone to follow me. I learned it the way I learned most things in those days, not from my son, but from the quiet network of loyal people who had been watching over my affairs long before Bradley understood there was anything worth watching. Marcus spotted the car first. A gray sedan parked across from the Ashford on a Sunday morning, engine running, a camera with a long lens resting on the passenger seat. He drove past twice, memorized the plate, and called Kellerman before he called me. Kellerman called me Monday at 10. Bradley retained an investigator on Friday, man named Raymond Doyle. Licensed, mid-level, mostly does infidelity work and insurance fraud. Not someone who usually handles anything like this. What does Bradley think this is? He filed the request under a family welfare inquiry. His stated concern in writing, which Doyle is legally required to document, was that his elderly father was being manipulated by outside parties and needed to be located for his own safety. Kellerman paused. "Walter, he framed hiring a man to follow you as an act of love." My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips. Love. The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, not with a splash, with that slow sinking displacement that changes the shape of everything beneath the surface. My son had told a licensed professional that he was worried about me, while I was living in a hotel because he had told me to get on my knees or get out. "What has Doyle reported back?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "That," Kellerman said, and now I could hear the undisguised satisfaction in his tone, "is where this becomes interesting." I heard him shuffle paper. Doyle's preliminary report, filed yesterday, states the following. Subject, that's you, departs the Ashford house each morning between 7:30 and 9. Subject is transported by private car to various locations, including the offices of Kellerman and Associates, the private banking center on Merrick Street, the Hensley Heritage Complex in the South District, and on Thursday, the 42nd floor of One Federal Plaza, where subject met with the executive team of Calderwood Partners for approximately 2 hours. My jaw loosened slightly. I had forgotten I would be seen at Calderwood. I had been so occupied with the mechanics of Phase 1 that I had not considered what those meetings would look like from the outside, through a long lens to a stranger being paid to find a diminished old man. Doyle also noted, Kellerman continued, that subject was greeted by name at every location. That subject was escorted, never made to wait. That at One Federal Plaza, the lobby receptionist called upstairs and said, and I am quoting his report directly, "Mr. Hensley is here," and that 3 people came down in the elevator to receive him. I exhaled slowly. 3 people had come down because that was how Preston Vance operated. He was old-fashioned that way. He believed the manner in which you greet a man tells him everything about how you value his time. How did Bradley react? Kellerman's voice shifted, careful now, choosing each word with a surgeon's precision. Doyle appended a note at the bottom of the report. He wrote, I have the document in front of me. Subject does not present as a man requiring welfare intervention. Subject presents as a man conducting active business at a senior executive level. Recommend client clarify objectives before authorizing further surveillance. The air went out of the room, or perhaps just out of me. A man paid by my son to find evidence that I was confused, diminished, in need of rescue, had instead filed a report saying that I looked like a man running a business. And Bradley had received that report, had to read it, had to sit alone with those words in his own investigator's handwriting, and feel whatever a man feels when he discovers that the story he has been telling himself about someone's has no evidence anywhere in the world to support it. Did he ask Doyle to continue? He paid for another week. But Doyle sent word through his assistant that he'd only continue if the client revised the stated purpose of the inquiry. He wasn't comfortable with the welfare framing anymore. I stood and walked to the window. The sky outside was a hard, clear blue, the kind that only appears after several days of cold, as though the atmosphere itself has been scrubbed. "Arthur," I said, "when Bradley really reads that report, what do you think he feels?" Kellerman was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was about to be honest rather than professional. "I think he feels the ground move," he said. "I think he begins to wonder whether the floor he has been standing on is as solid as he was told it was." My throat closed. I pressed my thumb against the cold window frame and held it there, letting the chill of the glass do the work my composure could not quite manage alone. I thought of Bradley at 8 years old, running across the lawn on a summer afternoon, laughing at something I could no longer remember, but laughing so freely that his whole body was involved in it. A child who had never once wondered where the lawn came from, who had never needed to. That was my doing. Not his, mine. "Stay close to this," I said. "I want to know everything. I won't leave you in the dark." I ended the call. Across the city, my son was reading a report that refused to say what he needed it to say. I had read enough reports in my life to know exactly what that feels like, and I hoped, even then, even after everything, that the discomfort would accomplish what 3 years of my silence had not. That it would make him stop. That it would make him think. We are just about halfway through this story now, and what my son did next is the thing that changed everything, for him, for me, and for the 200,000 strangers who were about to become witnesses. Before I take you there, do me one small favor. Drop the number 72 in the comments. That's my age. That's how I'll know you're still walking this road with me. And subscribe if you haven't, because what comes next, I promise you, nobody saw coming. 2 days after Bradley received that report, he walked into the county probate and family court and filed a petition against me. Kellerman knew within the hour. He had a contact in the clerk's office, nothing improper, simply someone who had worked around the Hensley Trust matters long enough to recognize which filings warranted a phone call. The call came at 11:15 on a Wednesday. I was finishing a late breakfast in the Ashfords' dining room, oatmeal with brown sugar, the same breakfast I had made for myself every morning of my adult life. The same breakfast I had made in that Chestnut Street kitchen, while my son and his wife slept past 9. "Walter." Kellerman's voice was taut, not panicked. Kellerman had never panicked in 22 years, taut the way a bowstring is taut in the instant before release. "Bradley filed this morning, guardianship and conservatorship. He is claiming you lack the mental capacity to manage your own financial affairs." The oatmeal went cold in front of me. My spoon came to rest against the rim of the bowl. I felt something move through my chest. Not fear, something else entirely, the specific sensation of watching a man reach for a weapon, without realizing it is pointed the wrong way. "Tell me exactly what he filed. The petition cites 3 grounds." His voice went crisp and clinical, the voice he used when he needed me to hear clearly rather than emotionally. "First, erratic financial behavior, specifically the account suspensions, the utility transfers, the vehicle recovery. He is framing your deliberate decisions as evidence of cognitive decline." Of course he was. A man who cannot conceive of being refused must explain refusal as illness. It is the only story available to him. Second, that you abandoned your residence without explanation, which he characterizes as disorientation. A pause. Third, and this is the one that matters, he submitted a letter purportedly from a physician named Dr. Nathaniel Ruskin. The letter states that in the physician's professional opinion, Walter Hensley displays early indicators of cognitive impairment and may not be capable of independent decision-making. My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Dr. Nathaniel Ruskin. I had never met a doctor. Nathaniel Ruskin. I had never sat in his office. I had never given him a history, never allowed him to evaluate anything about me, never been in the same room as the man. And yet, here was a letter with his name at the bottom of it, submitted to a court of law, asking a judge to strip me of the right to make decisions about my own life. That letter is fabricated, I said. Almost certainly. And that, Kellerman said, is precisely the problem your son is about to discover. I set the phone down on the tablecloth for a moment. I pressed both palms flat against the linen. I breathed in. I breathed out. Then I picked it back up. Tell him, Arthur. 7 months ago. His voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man delivering an answer that has been waiting patiently in a drawer for exactly this occasion. On the 15th of March, you sat for a full neuropsychological evaluation at St. Bartholomew's Medical Center. 4 hours, Doctor. Marianne Ledbetter, board-certified neurologist, teaching faculty, one of the most credentialed cognitive assessment specialists in the region. He let that settle. Dr. Ledbetter's report runs 41 pages. It documents executive function, memory, processing speed, judgment, and reasoning. The conclusion in her own words. Walter James Hensley presents with cognitive function in the superior range for his age cohort. No indicators of impairment. No indicators of early decline. Full decision-making capacity confirmed. My eyes burned, not because the results surprised me. I had known what Dr. Ledbetter would find, because I knew my own mind, a man generally does. My eyes burned because of the date. March 15th. 7 months before my son walked into that courthouse. 7 months before he handed a judge a forged piece of paper and asked to be given my life. I had sat in that room and answered every question and completed every assessment, not because I doubted myself, but because I had known with cold and total certainty that this day would arrive. I had built the shield before my son had even thought to reach for the sword. That is not foresight. I want to be honest about that. That is grief, arriving early and dressed as paperwork. File the Ledbetter report today, I said, and my voice cracked at the edge, just slightly, just enough to be true. Full document, every page, already prepared. I'll have it submitted within the hour. I'll also file a formal complaint regarding the Ruskin letter and request verification of Dr. Ruskin's license and of any examination he claims to have conducted. A pause. Walter, the petition will be dismissed. A judge is not going to appoint a guardian over a man holding a 41-page neurological clearance from a university-affiliated physician. Whatever attorney Bradley found on short notice should have done his due diligence before filing. This is going to come back at him very hard. I pushed the bowl aside. My appetite was gone entirely, replaced by something heavier and far more complicated. A grief that sat down directly beside the vindication and refused to be separated from it. My son had tried to have me declared incompetent. He had reached for the most fundamental thing a person possesses, the legal recognition of their own mind, and tried to take it, because I would not clean his wife's shoes. Marianne Ledbetter, I said quietly. When I left her office in March, do you know what she said to me? No, she said. Mr. Hensley, whoever is waiting for you to slow down is going to have a very long wait. My voice broke on the last word, cleanly, without warning, the way old timber sometimes breaks, not with a crack, with a deep, exhausted split along a grain that has been carrying weight for decades. She had been speaking about my health, but she might as well have been speaking about everything. Kellerman said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I'll file within the hour, he said. And Walter, he isn't going to win this, not today, not any day. The petition was dismissed on a Thursday afternoon. Kellerman called at 17 minutes past 4, his voice carrying the clean satisfaction of a man who has watched justice arrive precisely on schedule. The judge had reviewed the Ledbetter evaluation. He had noted the complete absence of any verified clinical contact between me and the purported doctor, Nathaniel Ruskin. He dismissed the petition with prejudice and referred the Ruskin letter to the State Board of Medicine for review of possible credential fraud. Bradley walked out of that courthouse with nothing, less than nothing. He walked out with a referral hanging over the attorney who had filed on his behalf. I had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has won a battle he never wanted to fight, in a war he never agreed to enter, against an opponent he had taught to walk. That same night, my son broke into my office. I did not know it was happening while it happened. I found out the next morning when Kellerman called at 7:30 and said 4 words I had been half expecting for days. He found the room. I set my coffee down. When? Approximately 10 last night. The building system logged a door breach on the 3rd floor. Suite 3C. The exterior lock was forced, bump key from the marks on the cylinder. He was inside for 43 minutes. Kellerman's voice was measured, but underneath the professionalism I could hear something else. Something almost like awe. Walter. He went through everything. Suite 3C. That room had existed for 11 years. I had never advertised it, never listed it on any directory, never mentioned it to another living soul except Kellerman and Marcus. It was registered to a holding entity with a name chosen specifically to be forgettable. The door was plain. The frosted glass panel beside it bore no name at all. To anyone walking that corridor, it looked like a storage closet or a conference room nobody had booked in years. What it actually contained was the quiet architecture of my entire working life. Floor-to-ceiling shelves along 3 walls. Tax law, estate planning, property management, 4 decades of industry journals annotated in pencil in my own hand. A mahogany desk with a single lamp. A brass anniversary clock Eleanor had given me in 1991, its pendulum still keeping perfect time to this day. And on the desk, exactly where I had left it, a leather-bound journal. Inside that journal was a map. Not a metaphor, an actual map, hand-drawn across 4 pages of every property, every entity, every trust, every subsidiary, every relationship, and every quiet favor that made up 30 years of work. I had drawn it myself, over 3 winters, because I had reached an age where a man begins to worry that the shape of his life exists only inside his own skull. My son had spent 43 minutes inside that room, looking for evidence that his father was losing his mind. What he found instead was the mind itself, laid out on paper, more organized than anything he had ever built. "Did he take anything?" I asked. "Nothing. That's the part I want you to understand." Kellerman paused. "The security footage shows him sitting down at your desk about 11 minutes in. He opens the journal, and then Walter, he doesn't move. For 31 minutes, he sits in your chair reading 4 pages of hand-drawn diagrams, and he does not move." I closed my eyes. I could see it. My boy, 42 years old, sitting alone at 11 o'clock at night in a chair he had never known existed, in a room he had never known existed, reading the answer to a question he had never once been curious enough to ask. Where does all of this come from? He had never asked. Not at 20, not at 30, not at 42, standing in a kitchen, telling the man who drew that map to get on his knees. 2 days later, I sat in Kellerman's office while he laid 3 folders on the desk between us. The third was the thickest. He slid it across without a word, which was how I knew that whatever was inside had weight enough to speak for itself. I opened it. The first page was a spreadsheet, columns of numbers running down the page in clean, unforgiving rows. Dates on the left, descriptions in the middle, amounts on the right. At the top, a header on the firm's letterhead. Hensley Family Trust Disbursement Ledger, January 2020 through October 2025. 5 years. Walk me through it, I said. Kellerman leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and began. His voice was even and precise, the voice he used when the numbers were doing the emotional work, and he knew it. The Chestnut Street mortgage, $3,400 a month, paid from the Hensley Family Trust since January 2020, the month Bradley and Vanessa moved in. Over 5 years, the trust has paid $204,000 in mortgage payments on a property your son has referred to, in multiple conversations and in one court document as my house. My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes on the page. Utilities, electric, gas, water, internet. Averaged $840 a month across 5 years. $50,400, paid by the trust. His finger moved down. The vehicle. $780 a month for 38 months before recovery. $29,640. Trust account. He turned the page. Groceries, household supplies, maintenance. The trust holds accounts with a premium grocery delivery service and 2 household management companies. Total expenditure over 5 years, $61,200. I set the pages down on the desk. My hands were trembling finely, that small, persistent tremor that visits a man's hands when his body registers something before his mind has finished processing it. I picked the pages back up immediately. I was not going to let go of them. I needed the paper in my hands because the numbers on it were real, and the reality of them was the only thing anchoring me to the room. Vanessa's business expenses, Kellerman said, moving to the 3rd page. The subscription powering her content platform. $420 a month for 4 years. The photography equipment she lists as a business asset. The trust paid $11,000 for that in 2021. The conference travel. the brand consultant she engaged in 2022. All of it routed through a Hensley subsidiary account that Bradley opened in her name without. And I want to be precise here, without your knowledge or your written authorization. I looked up from the page. He routed her business through my trust. Without documented authorization, Kellerman said carefully. He had access as a secondary user, as we established. He used that access in ways that went considerably beyond personal living expenses. I laid the papers flat and pressed both palms down on top of them. My throat had gone raw. My chest felt as though something inside it were tightening by increments, a vice closing a quarter turn with every new number. What is the total? He turned to the final page. At the bottom, a single line in bold type. He turned it to face me. $612,480. $612,000 over 5 years, from a trust they had never contributed a dollar to. Never acknowledged. Never once, not in any conversation I could summon from memory, expressed a single word of gratitude for. My eyes filled, not overflowed. Filled, the way a glass fills right to the surface and holds there, trembling in the last instant before it decides. My son told a judge I was not mentally competent, I said. My voice came out barely above a murmur. He called me cognitively impaired. He stood in a courthouse and questioned my mind, while living in a house my trust was paying for, driving a car my trust was leasing, eating food my trust was buying. I stopped, I swallowed. He called me a maintenance man, Arthur. $600,000, and not once, not one single time in 5 years, did either of them sit down across a table from me and say thank you. Not for the money, not even for the eggs I made every morning at 6 o'clock. Just, thank you for being here. Thank you for existing. Something. My voice broke on that last word. Completely, without warning, more deeply than it had broken on Ledbetter's name. I brought one hand up and pressed it against my mouth for a moment. My shoulders pulled forward, involuntarily, the body's ancient posture of pain absorbing itself inward, the shape a man makes when he is trying to keep something from getting out of him. Kellerman did not look away. He did not offer hollow comfort. He simply waited, with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some griefs must be witnessed rather than managed. After a moment, I lowered my hand. I straightened my back. I picked up the ledger and read the final page once more, slowly and completely, until every number had settled into me like sediment into still water. This goes into the evidence package, I said. My voice was steady again, not because the pain had passed, but because I had decided where to put it. It's already prepared. 3 folders, 5 years, $612,000, 43 minutes of footage, a dismissed petition and a forged doctor's letter. The case my son had built against me had been constructed entirely out of lies. The case building itself against him had been constructed entirely out of facts. I watched the video for the first time on a Wednesday morning, sitting on the edge of my hotel bed with my reading glasses on, and the phone held in both hands. Kellerman had sent the link at 6:42 with a single line beneath it. You should see this before you hear about it from anyone else. The clip was 47 seconds long. It had been filmed from the second floor of the brownstone, directly across from the house, a neighbor's front-facing security camera, the kind that runs continuously and stores everything in the cloud and forgets nothing. Someone had clipped those 47 seconds, sharpened the audio, and posted it to a neighborhood group the previous evening. By the time it reached me, it had been shared 800 times and viewed by 61,000 people. I pressed play. The angle looked slightly down at the front steps. The morning was overcast. This was the 6th of October, the morning I left. You could see the door. You could see Vanessa on the top step in her silk robe, phone raised, filming something inside the house. And then, 22 seconds in, you could hear my son's voice coming through the open doorway. Clear enough, sharp enough, carrying across a street to a stranger's microphone with the particular projection of a man who has never once worried about being overheard. Either get on your knees and apologize to my wife or get out of my house. Then 4 seconds of silence. Then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps crossing hardwood. Then the door opened, and a 72-year-old man in a winter coat walked out with a leather suitcase in his hand, moving with the unhurried gait of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is entirely at peace with it. The clip ended there. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hands and the room very still around me. My chest hurt, not the dull ache I had grown accustomed to. This was sharper, the pain of hearing my son's voice say those words in a stranger's recording, stripped of every excuse and delivered to 61,000 people at once. Get on your knees. 47 seconds. That was all it took for 2 years and 11 months of accumulated indignity to become a public fact. One tear came, just one, as slow and deliberate as everything else I had done in 3 weeks. I let it reach my jaw before I wiped it away. There was no reason to hide it, nobody was watching. Then I breathed, then I called Kellerman. I saw it, I said. Are you all right? His voice was careful, searching. Tell me where it stands, because I needed information more than I needed comfort. Comfort could wait. Right then I needed to understand the shape of what was happening. 61,000 views as of 6 this morning. By the time this call ends it will be more. 3 journalists have contacted my office for comment. I've declined all 3. It's been picked up by 2 local aggregators and 1 national publication that covers influencer culture. Vanessa's response. She posted at 11 last night. A statement. She said the clip was taken out of context, that it represented a private family disagreement misrepresented by people who don't understand her family's dynamic. His tone went clinically neutral. The comments beneath that post are significant. How significant? 42,000 responses in 8 hours. The ratio of negative to supportive is roughly 14-1. A pause. 3 of her sponsors issued statements this morning. 1 terminated at midnight, citing a brand values clause. A second followed at 4 a.m. The third posted 20 minutes ago saying they are, quote, deeply troubled by the content of the circulating video and are reviewing the partnership immediately. I stood up from the bed. My legs were unsteady beneath me, not from weakness, but from the sheer accumulated weight of 17 days pressing down through my feet into the floor. I walked to the window. The city was overcast, the sky the color of old pewter. She built an empire on the image of a gracious home, I said. My voice was rough at the edges. She dropped a pair of muddy shoes on my kitchen floor and walked away. And a camera across the street recorded what her gracious home actually sounded like. Walter. Kellerman's voice shifted, quieter now, the professional register dropping half an octave toward something human. I want you to know something. The response to that clip, the comments, the shares, the anger, none of it is manufactured. These are real people who watched 47 seconds of a 72-year-old man walk out of his son's house with a suitcase. And they were furious on your behalf. My throat closed entirely. I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and held them there. 61,000 strangers. People who had never met me, who did not know my name or my history or the 30 years of work that had built the house my son had ordered me out of. They watched 47 seconds and understood instinctively that something deeply wrong had occurred. Eleanor used to say that people know the truth when they see it, even when they cannot explain it. She had believed that with a conviction that occasionally exasperated me in its simplicity. Standing at that window, watching the pewter sky, I was ashamed of every moment I had ever doubted her. There's something you need to come in for tomorrow, Kellerman said, his voice returning to its professional register. I found something in the forensic materials. Something about Bradley's career. I think you need to hear it in person. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of something? The kind, he said carefully, that changes the story your son has been telling himself about who he is. I went to his office the next afternoon carrying a weight I could not yet name. The particular unease of a man who has been told that what he is about to hear will change something, without knowing which something, or how completely. Kellerman was standing when I walked in, which he rarely did. He had his reading glasses in his hand rather than on his face, turning them slowly by one arm, a habit I had learned to read as his version of nervous energy, the thing his hands did when his mind was moving faster than the conversation around it. Sit down, Walter. Then, almost immediately, actually, before you sit down, I want you to see something. He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was an email thread, an internal company address in the header. The date stamp read September 14, 2019. The subject line was 3 words, Re Hensley Referral. I sat down slowly. The first message in the thread was from Preston Vance, the Preston Vance, managing partner of Calderwood Partners, the man whose executive team had come down 3 floors to greet me in a lobby. A man I had known for 22 years, had done business with across 4 developments, had once hosted for Thanksgiving dinner when his own family was snowbound 2 states away. The email read, James, as discussed, I'm happy to bring Bradley in for the senior creative director role. Out of respect for Walter, I'll make sure the process looks competitive. He's a bright enough kid. Whether he's right for the position is a separate question. But Walter asked, and I don't say no to Walter Hensley. Please proceed with the paperwork. I read it twice. Then a third time, more slowly, making certain I had not misunderstood a single word. Who is he writing to? His operations director. Kellerman was watching me carefully, the glasses still turning in his hand. The reply below confirms the offer letter would be prepared, and the other candidates in the pipeline would be, and I'm quoting, gracefully redirected. I leaned back in the chair. My hands rested in my lap, and I looked at them for a moment. The hands of a 72-year-old man, knuckles thickened, skin gone loose, hands that had held wrenches and blueprints, and my wife's hand at the end of her life. Hands that had also, apparently, quietly arranged the career of a son who had spent 5 years believing he built it himself. I asked James for that favor, I said. It was not a question. August of 2019, 3 weeks before Bradley's interview. The forensic team pulled all correspondence between Calderwood accounts and any Hensley-associated address during the 5-year review. This thread came up in the sweep. He set the glasses down on the desk. Walter, did you know he doesn't know? The question found something soft and unguarded. My eyes went hot immediately, that burning I had come to recognize as the body's first warning before something deeper arrives. I assumed he suspected, I said slowly. The way children suspect things they don't want confirmed. I thought I told myself that if he performed well enough in the role, it wouldn't matter how the door opened. I stopped, I swallowed. He performed adequately, not exceptionally, adequately, and I decided that was enough. He's held that position for 5 years, Kellerman said. He's listed it on every document he has filed, including the guardianship petition, as evidence of his professional, standing, and financial independence. A pause. He told the court he was a self-made professional man. I pressed my fist against my mouth, hard. The knuckles dug into my lips, and I held them there for 3 full seconds, while something moved through my chest that was too large and too tangled to carry a single name. Grief, yes. Anger, yes. But underneath both, something worse, the specific devastation of a parent who understands, in a moment of terrible clarity, that his act of love has become the architecture of his child's delusion. I had opened that door because I loved him, because I wanted him to have a good life, a solid footing, something to stand on. I had called in a favor with a man I trusted and asked him to give my boy a chance. And Bradley had walked through that door and built an entire identity on the belief that he had opened it himself. That is the thing nobody tells you about helping your children. Help given in secret does not disappear. It becomes the invisible foundation of everything they think they know about themselves. And a foundation a man does not know he is standing on is a foundation he can never learn to build upon. He genuinely doesn't know, I said. My voice broke, not dramatically, honestly, the way old wood gives under sustained weight. He's been walking around for 5 years believing he earned that on his own merit. No, Kellerman said gently. He doesn't know. I stood abruptly. Not from anger, from the sheer physical impossibility of remaining still inside that understanding. I walked to the window and put one hand against the frame and gripped it. Outside, an ordinary Thursday moved fast in every direction. Collars turned up. Everyone was somewhere to be. The trees along the sidewalk stripped nearly bare by 3 days of wind. A city with no knowledge of and no interest in the conversation happening 4 floors above its head. Does he need to know? I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. Kellerman joined me at the window, standing a respectful distance to my left. That's your decision, he said. Not mine. I thought of Bradley at 28, coming to me nervous and trying to hide it, telling me he wanted to move into the creative industry. I had listened. I had nodded. I had said encouragingly, "Let me see what I can do." He had heard that as a blessing. He had not understood it as a literal statement of intent, and I had never corrected him. For 14 years, I had never corrected him. That silence was mine. It belonged to me the way the map in Suite 3C belonged to me. I had drawn them both. Yes, I said. He needs to know. My voice had steadied, not from the absence of pain, but from the decision itself, which always carries its own particular clarity. I turned from the window and faced Kellerman directly. Not to humiliate him. Not as punishment. He needs to know because he cannot build anything real on a foundation he doesn't know is borrowed. And because I am done, completely done, watching my son live inside a story that isn't true. Kellerman held my gaze. His expression was steady and serious, and beneath both, genuinely moved. When? Soon, but not yet. There are things he still needs to see first. I picked up my coat. My hands trembled slightly as I put it on, and I did not try to hide it from the one man who had seen all of it anyway. One more thing, Arthur. I paused at the door. When we sit down with him, all of it comes out. The trust records, the career, the footage, the map. I looked at him steadily. Everything. He gets the full truth. Every page. Every page, he said. Bradley was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a corner table in a small coffee shop across the river. Mismatched chairs, exposed brick, the smell of dark roast so thick in the air it felt like weather. I had chosen it because neither of us had any history with it. Neutral ground. A place where neither of us could retreat into the comfort of familiar territory. He looked up when I walked in. Something moved across his face. Not the arrogance I had grown accustomed to. Not the calculated pleasantness he wore when he needed something. Something rawer than either. He looked for the first time in years like my son. He had lost weight in 3 weeks. His jaw was sharper. The skin beneath his eyes carried the particular grayness of a man who has not slept cleanly in some time. He wore a plain dark jacket, no pressed linen, no performed elegance. Just a man in a coffee shop, waiting for a conversation he had no idea how to prepare for. I sat down across from him. I did not smile. I did not perform an ease I did not feel. I set my coat on the chair beside me, folded my hands on the table, and looked at my son directly. "You called me," I said. "So talk." His jaw worked. He curled both hands around his cup and stared into it as though the answer might be floating there. "I know about the report," he said finally. "Doyle's report. I know what it said." His voice was low. "And I know the petition was dismissed. My attorney told me about the referral. About Ruskin." He stopped. Something in his throat moved. "Dad, I want to say I didn't know that letter was fake. But that's not true. I didn't ask. I was given a name and I didn't ask a single question, because I needed it to be real." That was the first true sentence my son had spoken to me in 3 years. I want you to understand what that costs a man. It costs more than money. It costs the story he tells himself in the dark. "Why?" I asked. "Because," he stopped. His hands were shaking around the cup. "Because if you weren't sick, then it meant you meant it. It meant you knew exactly what you were doing when you walked out. And that meant I had done something so bad that my father, chose a hotel over me. And I couldn't." His voice cracked. "I couldn't hold that. So I decided you were sick. It was easier." I reached into my coat pocket. I took out the photograph and set it on the table between us, facing him. I had carried it for 11 days, waiting for this exact table and this exact version of my son. It was a small square photo, faded to warm orange the way photographs from that era always fade. A 7-year-old boy sitting cross-legged on a garage floor, with a cotton cloth in both hands, and one of my work shoes balanced on his knee, polishing it with the ferocious concentration only a child can bring to a task nobody asked him to do. Bradley looked at it. The sound that came out of him was not a word. It was not a sob. It was something that started in his chest and came out broken and formless. The sound a grown man makes when something inside him gives way along a fault line that has been forming for years. His shoulders collapsed forward. His hands came up and covered his face. And then my son, 42 years old, senior creative director, a man who had stood in a courtroom and called his father incompetent, wept. Not quietly, not with any pretense of composure. He wept the way a person weeps when they have been holding something back so long that the release of it has no shape and no dignity and no end anywhere in sight. I did not move. I did not reach across the table. I let it happen. Because it needed to happen, and because there is no way to abbreviate the grief of a man meeting the truth about himself for the first time. After a long while, he lowered his hands. His face was devastated, eyes swollen, cheeks wet, lips pressed together in the expression of a man trying to reassemble himself out of pieces that no longer quite fit. "I was 7, he said. His voice was wrecked, barely audible. "I remember that day. You were so stressed. I just wanted to help you." He looked at the photograph again, and something in him broke open a second time. "What happened to me, Dad? What happened?" My own throat tightened so severely that for a moment I could not speak. My eyes burned and filled, and I let them, sitting in a coffee shop with my son's tears on the table between us, and 30 years of love and failure and silence, finally finding the air it had needed all along. I don't know, I said honestly. My voice was barely more than breath. I've asked myself that every day for 3 weeks. Maybe longer. I reached out then, slowly, deliberately, and placed my hand over his on the table. His hand turned under mine and gripped it hard. The grip of a 7-year-old boy inside a 42-year-old man's hand. But I think it started the day you stopped being curious about where things came from. I paused. And I think I'm the one who taught you not to ask. His shoulders heaved once more. He pressed his free hand over his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out shattered, jagged, more breath than voice. Dad, I'm so sorry. I held his hand and said nothing else, because some things, when they finally arrive, do not need a response. They only need to be received. Kellerman's conference room was on the 4th floor, a long rectangular space with a mahogany table and windows that looked out over the rooftops toward the water. I had been in that room dozens of times across 30 years. I had signed partnership agreements there. I had reviewed closings. I had sat through the reading of Eleanor's own will on a gray February morning, 2 years earlier, with Bradley beside me, both of us, pretending we were holding together better than we were. Today my son sat across from me at the far end of the table. He had showered and changed since Saturday, dark trousers, a gray sweater, no tie. His eyes were still faintly swollen at the edges. He held a glass of water in both hands and watched Kellerman arrange documents with the expression of a man sitting in a waiting room outside a surgery he cannot postpone. Kellerman cleared his throat and sat down. I want to begin by explaining what this document is and why we are here today. He opened the folder. On the 15th of February this year, 8 months ago, Walter came to this office and executed a comprehensive revision of his last will and testament. It was witnessed by 2 members of this firm and notarized. It is fully valid and legally binding. He looked at Bradley directly. This is not a surprise reading. Walter wanted you to hear it while he was in the room. That was his specific instruction. Bradley's grip on the glass tightened. He looked at me. I held his gaze. February, he said. His voice was careful, controlled at visible cost. You revised your will in February. That's 8 months before. He stopped himself. His jaw worked. You were planning this for 8 months. Longer, I said. I've been planning how to protect what I built for 30 years. February was when I finalized the last details. I leaned forward slightly. Bradley, everything Arthur is about to read to you, I need you to understand this. It was not written out of anger. I wrote it in February, before the shoes, before the petition, before any of it. I held his eyes. This is what I intended all along. Something shifted in his face. A complicated movement of understanding and grief crossing each other, like 2 weather systems meeting over open water. He set the glass down. He nodded once, very slightly, as though anchoring himself before the next wave arrived. Kellerman began to read. The revised Hensley estate plan consists of 3 primary instruments. First, the Hensley Family Trust, currently valued at approximately $4.3 million in liquid and managed assets, will be transitioned to a charitable remainder trust upon Walter's passing. The named beneficiary is the Eleanor Hensley Foundation, a nonprofit entity Walter incorporated in March of this year to provide housing stability resources and vocational training for families at risk in this city. Bradley drew a slow breath through his nose, his hands flattened on the table. Second instrument. The Hensley Heritage Complex, the South District property currently assessed at $41.3 million, will remain in its holding company during Walter's lifetime. Upon his passing, the property transfers in full to the Eleanor Hensley Foundation as its primary endowment asset. Rental income from the complex will fund the foundation's operating programs in perpetuity. The room was very quiet. Outside, a single pigeon landed on the ledge opposite and sat there with the unconcerned dignity of a creature that has no stake whatsoever in human decisions. Bradley's eyes had gone glassy. He was not crying, not yet, but the line between composure and its absence was visibly thin. Third instrument. Kellerman's voice shifted a half-note lower. The Chestnut Street property, the family residence, currently held by the Hensley Family Trust, will be listed for sale at market value no later than the 1st of January. The net proceeds will be divided equally between the Eleanor Hensley Foundation and the establishment of the Eleanor Hensley Memorial Scholarship, administered through the State University's School of Social Work, providing full tuition to 2 students per year with demonstrated financial need. Bradley made a sound. Just one, short, compressed, The very beginning of something he locked down immediately behind his teeth. His eyes were wet now, openly, without pretense. "The house," he said. His voice was barely functional. "You're selling the house." "Yes, Mom's house. Your mother's house that I built," I said. "That I refinished and painted and planted and paid for every month for 26 years. That I moved into as a room at the back with a window facing an alley." My voice held. Steadily, carefully, because I had rehearsed this sentence at 5 in the morning for 3 consecutive days until it could no longer break me. "I'm not selling it to punish you, Bradley. I'm selling it because the Eleanor Hensley Foundation needs capital to do real work in this city. Because your mother would have wanted her name on something that helped people who were struggling. The way she and I struggled when we were young and had nothing but a bad apartment and each other." I stopped. She never cared about that house. She cared about what we did inside it. And what we did inside it, at the end, was not something she would have wanted her name on. Bradley's chin dropped to his chest. Both hands came up and pressed against the back of his skull, elbows on the table, the posture of a man absorbing a blow from a direction he could not have anticipated. A sound escaped him, low and involuntary, and then another, and his shoulders began to shake again with the quiet, helpless rhythm of a man who thought he had already spent all his tears and is discovering that he has more. "There is a fourth element," Kellerman said gently, but without delay. "A personal bequest separate from the estate instruments. It will be delivered physically." He looked at me. I nodded. "But not today," I said. "That one comes when the time is right." Bradley looked up at me from behind his hands. His face was destroyed, red-eyed, hollowed out by the particular grief of a man who has just understood fully and irreversibly the size of what he almost threw away. "Dad," he said, "what do I do now?" I looked at my son, really looked at him the way I had not been able to in years. And I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, not yet. But the first tentative movement toward it, like a door that has been sealed a long time beginning, very slowly to swing. "You start," I said, "be telling the truth." 2 nights after the reading, I sat alone at the small desk in my hotel room and wrote a letter to my son. Not the legal kind. Not a document with witnesses and notary seals and 30 years of careful planning behind it. Just a letter. Paper and pen, and the particular quiet of a Wednesday night in late October, when the wind had come up off the water and was pressing itself against the windows with a low, persistent sound, like something asking to be let in. I had been composing that letter in the back of my mind since the morning I lifted the suitcase down from the closet shelf. Maybe longer. Maybe since the small hours of nights when the house on Chestnut Street was dark and quiet, and I lay awake in my narrow back room, listening to the building settle around me, trying to understand how a life built on love had arrived somewhere that felt so much like its opposite. I opened the desk drawer and took out the parcel I had prepared that afternoon. The cloth was not much to look at. 4 inches by 6, cotton, cream-colored, the kind they sell in any hardware store for $1.50. I had bought it the previous week, washed it once so the stiffness was gone, folded it into a neat square, and set it on the desk where I could look at it while I decided what to say. Eleanor would have laughed at me. She would have stood in the doorway of whatever room I was being serious in and said, in that voice she used when I was overthinking something obvious, "Walter, James Hensley, it's a piece of cloth. Write the letter and come to bed." And then she would have come in anyway, and sat on the edge of the bed, and listened while I worked it out loud, because that was who she was, the woman who teased you for your seriousness, and then stayed up until midnight helping you carry it. I pressed my hand flat over the folded cloth for a moment. The cotton was soft under my palm. Then I picked up the pen. I wrote slowly. Not because I didn't know what to say. The words had been inside me long enough that they no longer required searching. I wrote slowly because I wanted every letter legible and every sentence clear. Bradley was going to read this, and I wanted him to read the handwriting of a man who was steady, a man who had not been broken by any of it, even in the hours when it had cost him everything he had. "Bradley, T. I found this cloth in the drawer of my workbench the summer you were 7 years old. You used it to polish my shoes on a Sunday morning when I was running late. I never asked for the help. You gave it anyway. I kept it because your mother saw me looking at it that evening and said, 'Keep that. You'll want it someday.' She was right. She was usually right. This cloth is the only thing I am leaving you from my personal effects. Not because you deserve less, but because it is worth more than everything else I own put together. It is proof that the person you were at 7 years old is still somewhere inside you. I have been waiting 35 years for him to come back. I spent $600,000 keeping a roof over your head and never asked for a word of thanks. I am not asking now. What I am asking is simpler and harder than gratitude. I am asking you to remember what you already knew at 7, that a man of dignity does not wait to be asked before he helps. That real strength is not in what you own, or what you control, or what you can make another person do. It is in what you give freely without keeping score. You asked me at that table what happened to you. I told you I didn't know. That was only half true. I think what happened is that you stopped polishing shoes and started counting them. Come back from that. It is not too late. It is never too late for a man who is still breathing and still capable of shame, and you proved at that table that you are both. The cloth is yours. What you do with it is yours. Your father T. Walter. I set the pen down. My hand was trembling finely across the knuckles, that small persistent tremor that had been visiting more often in recent weeks. The body's way of reminding a man that 72 is not a small number. I read it back from the beginning, word by word, the way Eleanor had taught me to read anything important. Slowly, without rushing toward the end. When I finished, my eyes were full, not overflowing, full and still the way deep water is still. I folded the letter in thirds. I placed it on top of the cloth. I wrapped both in a single sheet of brown paper, the plain kind, no ribbon, no box, folded the edges neatly, and pressed the creases flat with the heel of my hand. On the outside, in the same careful handwriting, I wrote one word, Bradley. Then I set it on the corner of the desk and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I sat a while and listened to the wind working at the windows. I thought about the brass anniversary clock still sitting on the desk in Suite 3C, its pendulum keeping me in perfect time through every event of the past month, with the patient indifference of a well-made thing. I thought about Eleanor at 29, standing in the doorway of our first apartment, holding a newborn Bradley against her shoulder, looking at me with an expression I was never able to fully describe. Something between exhaustion and a joy so complete, it had no need to perform itself. "Don't mess this up, Walter T.," she had said. And she was smiling when she said it. And I had laughed because I was 29 and terrified, and the baby had finally stopped crying, and the whole world felt briefly, gloriously possible. I had not messed it up, not entirely, not yet. The man in Suite 3C who had drawn maps and built trusts and called in quiet favors, and sat for 4 hours of neurological testing on a gray March morning, that man had not messed it up. He had built something real. He had loved his son imperfectly and completely, and he had not stopped, even when love asked him to do the hardest thing love ever asks, to step back and let the consequences arrive. Outside, the wind eased for a moment. The windows went quiet. I picked up the parcel and held it in both hands. This small brown package, lighter than anything that had ever cost this much. And I said out loud, to the room, to the dark, to Eleanor, wherever she was, "I think we're going to be all right." The house sold on the 12th of December. I wasn't there when it happened. The night before, Marcus drove me past it once, a single slow pass along Chestnut Street, headlights sweeping across the limestone facade, the iron fence, Eleanor's hydrangeas standing bare and skeletal in the winter cold. I didn't ask him to stop. I said goodbye the way you say goodbye to something that has been both a home and a wound at the same time. Quietly, without ceremony, without performance, knowing in your bones that it is finally time. 8 days later, on a Saturday morning, I called my son. "Meet me on Whitmore Street," I said. 11 o'clock. There's a shop called Prentice's between the hardware store and the florist. Look for the clock in the window. He was there at 10:53, collar turned up against the December cold, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. When I stepped out of the car, something moved across his face, relief and apprehension arriving together, the way they always do when a thing you have been both dreading and hoping for, in equal measure, finally appears in front of you. The two do not cancel each other out. They arrive as one. "Dad," he said, "Bradley." We went inside. Prentice's clock and watch repair had occupied the same narrow storefront for 41 years. Harold Prentice, 70 years old, white-haired, with the deep, unhurried patience of a fan who has spent his entire life working with mechanisms that simply cannot be rushed, looked up from behind the counter and nodded with quiet recognition. "Mr. Hensley, right on time." The shop smelled of machine oil and old wood and that particular sweetness that comes from 100 clocks keeping their time simultaneously in one small room. The walls were lined with them: pocket watches, mantel clocks, carriage clocks, a tall grandfather clock standing in the corner like a dignified old man who has outlived everyone he came in with. The sound was not noise, it was rhythm. Layer upon layer of ticking, each mechanism slightly offset from the others, creating a texture of time that felt almost organic, almost like breathing. Standing inside it was like standing inside something alive. I reached into my coat and took out the brown paper parcel. I had wrapped it 7 weeks earlier at a desk in a hotel room, and I had carried it with me for 8 days, waiting for the right morning to present itself. This was the right morning. I had known it when I woke up. I held it out to my son. He looked at his name on the outside, one word, in my handwriting. His throat moved. His hands were not steady when he reached out and took it. He opened it carefully, with the deliberate care of a man who understands instinctively that what he is holding is not ordinary. He found the cloth first, folded neatly inside. Then he found the letter. He read it standing at the counter, while 100 clocks kept their 100 separate rhythms around us. I watched his face, the way you watch, the face of someone you have known since, before they had words. When he reached the line about counting shoes, instead of polishing them, his chin dropped and then recovered. A small private collapse, quickly gathered back. When he reached the words, "Your father, Walter," his eyes overflowed, 2 clean lines running down his face that he did not wipe away, as though he had made a decision that this time he would not pretend the grief was not sitting right there in the open between us. "I don't know how to fix what I did," he said. His voice was wrecked and honest and entirely without pretense. "You can't fix it," I said. "That's not how it works. You don't fix the past, Bradley. The past doesn't get fixed. What you do is build something different on top of it. Slowly, carefully, without stopping when it gets difficult, without walking away when it asks more of you than you feel you have." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "And you start today. Not tomorrow, today." He reached up and gripped my hand with the full, desperate strength of a man who has finally found the one solid thing in a room that has been shaking beneath his feet for years. He held on the way men hold on when they have stopped caring whether it looks like holding on. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, Dad." Harold caught my eye from the far end of the counter. He said nothing. He only smiled, small, private, the smile of a man who has seen enough of life to recognize a significant moment when it stands quietly in his shop, and then looked back down at his work, giving us the dignity of the distance. I was 72 years old. I had buried a wife, built a trust out of what remained, and carried a letter folded inside brown paper in my coat pocket for 8 days, waiting for the right morning, and the right room, and the right version of my son to hand it to. The parcel had contained a piece of cotton cloth worth almost nothing in money, and everything I had spent years failing to find the right moment to say out loud. Standing there among all those ticking clocks, with my hand on my son's shoulder and his hand gripping mine, it was exactly enough. Not more than enough, not less. Exactly enough, the way the right things, when they finally arrive, always are. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung left, right, patient, unhurried, certain, keeping perfect time for no one in particular and all of us at once. Looking back at everything that happened, I will not pretend I was the hero of this story. I was a father who loved his son in all the wrong ways. That is the confession underneath everything else, and I want to make it plainly, because a story like this is worthless if the man telling it only indicts other people. I opened doors instead of teaching him how to knock. I paid every bill instead of teaching him what $1 actually costs. I called in a favor and let him believe for 5 years that he had earned what I had arranged, because his pride was more comfortable for me than his growth. And when the disrespect began, and it began small, the way these things always begin, with a tone, with an eye roll, with a request that was really an instruction, I stayed quiet. For 2 years and 11 months I stayed quiet. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I was not keeping the peace. I was financing my own erasure, one silent morning at a time. That silence became as much a part of the problem as anything my son ever did. So let me leave you with the things it took me 72 years and one pair of muddy shoes to learn. The first is this: love and service are not the same thing. A parent can serve their child for 40 years and never once love them well, because love sometimes requires the word no, and service never does. If you have never told the people you love no, you have not yet found out whether they love you or love what you provide. That discovery is painful. It is also the only ground on which a real relationship can be built. The second, dignity is not something you protect in secret. It is something you declare, clearly, early, and out loud, before the cost of your silence grows larger than the cost of the conversation you were afraid to have. I waited almost 3 years to say a sentence that took 4 seconds. Do not do what I did. If someone in your family is treating you like a stranger in your own home, say so today. Not when it gets worse. Today. The version of you who speaks up early is spared everything the version who waits will have to survive. The third, and this is the one I would carve into stone if I could, help that hides itself becomes harm. Every time you rescue someone quietly and let them believe they rescued themselves, you are not protecting their confidence. You are building it on sand and then leaving them to stand on it alone for the rest of their life. If you help someone, let them know. Let them carry the weight of being helped. That weight is not humiliation. That weight is gratitude, and gratitude is the muscle that a person's character is built from. A child who never learns to carry it grows into an adult who cannot lift anything at all. And the fourth, it is never too late, not for the parent, not for the child. Bradley is 43 now. He resigned from the position I arranged and took a smaller one that he found himself. And he is not very good at it yet, and he is learning, and he calls me on Sundays. Not because a trust requires it, because he wants to. That is the only thing I ever actually wanted, and I had to lose a house to find out I could have simply asked. Justice, in the end, did not arrive for me through a courtroom. The courtroom was just paperwork. Justice arrived on a Saturday morning in a shop full of clocks. In the moment the truth was finally spoken out loud between two men who share a name, however late, however painful, however much it cost us both to get there. Because real strength was never about winning, it was about refusing to disappear. And real family justice is not built on power, or money, or leverage, or being right. It is built on the courage to tell the truth, even when the truth costs you the house you built with your own 2 hands. If this story moved something in you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. I read them all, and I mean that. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has been staying quiet in a house that used to be theirs. And subscribe to my channel so you never miss what comes next. Thank you, genuinely, deeply, for staying with me all the way to the last word. That means more than you know. This story was written by a human being who has spent a long time thinking about families, and about how quietly love can go wrong in them. It contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection, and any resemblance to real names, places, or persons is entirely coincidental. But every lesson inside it is real, and every one of them costs somebody something. If that is not what you were looking for today, that is perfectly all right. Choose what serves you best. I will be here whenever you are ready.